They gave me away, then sued for the love I was given. The air in Mr. Higgins' office smelled like leather and old paper, the kind of smell that makes you think of permanence, of things that last. I sat in one of those high-back chairs that lawyers seem to love, my hands folded in my lap, still wearing the simple black dress I'd worn to Grandpa Frank's funeral 3 weeks earlier. The fabric was wrinkled now. I hadn't had the energy to iron it, hadn't had the energy for much of anything since we'd lowered his casket into the ground beside the peony bushes Grandma Eleanor had planted 40 years ago. Grandma sat beside me, smaller than I'd ever seen her, her hand trembling slightly as it rested on the arm of her chair. She'd aged a decade in those 3 weeks. The woman who had taught me how to knead bread dough until it was soft as a baby's cheek, who had shown me how to deadhead roses and change spark plugs, now looked fragile enough to break. Across from us sat my biological parents. I still can't bring myself to call them Mom and Dad. Those titles were earned by the people who raised me, who showed up for every scraped knee and bad dream, every school play and college acceptance letter. Carol and Mark had given birth to me 35 years ago, handed me over to Frank and Eleanor when I was 3 months old, and then disappeared into their lives in Phoenix like I was a problem they'd successfully delegated. Carol sat with her spine straight, her designer suit probably worth more than I made in a month teaching high school history. Her hair was perfect, swept back in that way wealthy women achieve, not a strand out of place even in grief. Except she wasn't grieving. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, moving between Mr. Higgins and the documents on his desk like she was already doing math in her head. Mark looked exactly like what he was, a successful real estate developer who saw the world in terms of property values and profit margins. His silver hair was distinguished, his watch expensive, his expression impatient. He'd checked his phone twice since we'd sat down. They'd flown in for the funeral, of course. Stood at a respectful distance during the service. Carol had even dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I never saw actual tears. They'd left immediately after, citing important meetings back in Phoenix. But here they were again, 3 weeks later, for the reading of the will. Mr. Higgins cleared his throat. He was an old family friend, had handled Grandpa Frank's legal affairs for decades. His eyes were kind but sad as he looked at us. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice gentle. "Frank left very clear instructions about his wishes, and Eleanor has also made her intentions known regarding her portion of the estate." I felt Grandma's hand reach for mine. Her fingers were cold, still covered in the spots and wrinkles of a life well lived. I squeezed back, trying to pour strength into her the way she'd poured it into me my entire life. "The house, the property, Frank's car collection, and all personal effects are to be divided between Eleanor's half and Frank's half," Mr. Higgins continued. "Frank's half goes entirely to his granddaughter, Esther Marie Thompson." My throat tightened. Even from the grave, Grandpa was taking care of me. "And Eleanor," Mr. Higgins said, turning to my grandmother, "you've asked me to read your statement regarding your half of the estate?" Grandma nodded, and I saw her jaw set in that determined way I knew so well. The same look she'd had when she taught me to drive a stick shift in Grandpa's '69 Mustang, refusing to let me give up even when I stalled out 15 times in the grocery store parking lot. Mr. Higgins unfolded a piece of paper, and I recognized Grandma's handwriting immediately, the same careful script that had labeled every jar of her homemade strawberry preserves, every birthday card she'd ever sent me. "I, Eleanor May Thompson, being of sound mind and clear intention, do hereby bequeath my half of the estate in its entirety to my granddaughter, Esther Marie Thompson." Mr. Higgins' voice caught slightly, and he paused before continuing. "This includes my half of the house at 427 Maple Street, my personal jewelry collection, my half interest in Frank's automobile collection, and all other assets and personal effects. I leave these things to Esther so that she will always be surrounded by our love, even when we are no longer here to give it in person." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Carol stood up. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Mother, you're not thinking clearly. You just lost Dad 3 weeks ago. You're grieving, you're not in your right mind." "I am perfectly in my right mind, Carol," Grandma said, and her voice, though quiet, had steel in it. "Perhaps the clearest it's been in years." "You're giving everything to her?" Mark said, leaning forward. "Everything? The house alone is worth at least $800,000, and Frank's car collection, do you have any idea what those vehicles are worth?" And there it was. The real reason they'd come back. "I know exactly what they're worth," Grandma said. "Every single one of those cars has a story, and Esther is in all of them. She earned this inheritance the way Frank and I always believed inheritance should be earned, with presence, with love, with showing up. Carol's face went red. We had careers, Mother. We had responsibilities. We couldn't just. You had a daughter, Grandma interrupted, and for the first time, I heard her voice break. You had a daughter, and you gave her away because she wasn't convenient. Frank and I were grateful for every single day we got with Esther. But don't you dare stand here now and pretend you have any claim to what we built with her. I wanted to applaud. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just held Grandma's hand tighter and watched my biological parents' mask slip. We'll contest this, Mark said, standing up. Eleanor, you're clearly not in a stable emotional state to be making these kinds of decisions. We'll fight this. Then fight, Grandma said. But you won't win. Because unlike you, I know what I'm fighting for. They left, Carol's heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, Mark already on his phone before he'd even reached the door. Mr. Higgins looked at us with sad eyes. I'm sorry, Eleanor, he said. Esther. They'll likely make good on that threat. Let them, Grandma said, but her hand was shaking harder now, and I could see the toll this was taking on her. That night, I drove us home in the Mustang, the one Grandpa had kept in the garage under a cover, the one he'd taught me to restore when I was 16. The engine purred like a contented cat, and the smell of old leather and motor oil surrounded us. Grandma was quiet beside me, staring out the window at the familiar streets of our small Georgia town. I learned to drive in this car, I said softly. Do you remember? I was so scared I was going to break something, and Grandpa just laughed and said the car was tougher than I thought. You stalled out at the stoplight in front of the Baptist church, Grandma said, and I heard the ghost of a smile in her voice. The pastor was standing right there on the sidewalk, and you were mortified. Grandpa waved at him like nothing was wrong and told me to try again, I said. He never made me feel stupid, not once. We pulled into the driveway of 427 Maple Street, the house that had been my home since I was 3 months old. It was a modest 2-story craftsman. With a wraparound porch, painted pale yellow with white trim. The peony bushes Grandma had planted were thick along the foundation, their blooms long since faded for the season, but their leaves still green and lush. The garden beds were immaculate because Grandma tended them every single day, rain or shine. Inside, the house smelled like it always had, bread and vanilla and the faint scent of the lemon oil Grandma used on the furniture. Every surface held memories. The kitchen table where I'd done my homework while Grandma kneaded dough. The living room where Grandpa and I had watched old westerns on Sunday afternoons. The mantel above the fireplace, covered in framed photos of a life lived together. There wasn't a single picture of Carol or Mark anywhere in the house. Not because Grandma and Grandpa had been cruel, but because there had simply never been any moments to capture. You can't frame absence. Tea? Grandma asked, moving toward the kitchen like she always did when things got hard. Her love language had always been food, comfort in the form of nourishment. I'll make it, I said, guiding her to the table instead. You sit. I moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd lived there forever, knowing exactly where the tea kettle was kept, which cabinet held the mugs, where Grandma stored her honey. As the water heated, I looked around at the space that had witnessed so much of my life. The recipe box on the counter, filled with Grandma's handwritten cards, each one stained and splattered from use. Her apron hanging on the hook by the stove, the one with the faded strawberries that she'd worn when teaching me how to make pie crust. The kitchen window that looked out over her garden, where we'd spent countless hours together, her hands in the soil, teaching me the names of plants and the rhythms of growing things. They're going to try to take this, Grandma said quietly. All of it. I brought her tea to the table and sat down across from her. Then we'll fight them. I don't know if I have the strength, sweetheart, she said, and her voice was so small, so defeated. Without Frank. You're not without him, I said firmly. He's in every corner of this house, every tool in that garage, every car in that collection. And you're not alone. You have me. You've always had me. She reached across the table and cupped my face with her hand, the way she'd done since I was a little girl. You were the greatest gift Frank and I ever received. Every single day with you was a blessing. The blessing was mine, Grandma, I said, my voice breaking. You and Grandpa saved my life. You gave me a home. You gave me love. You gave me everything that matters. The lawsuit papers arrived 2 weeks later. I was at work, teaching my second period class about the civil rights movement, when my phone buzzed with a text from Grandma. The lawyer had just left. Carol and Mark were suing to overturn the will, claiming that Grandma's grief had left her mentally compromised and unable to make sound decisions. They were claiming I'd manipulated her, taken advantage of an elderly woman in mourning, and used undue influence to secure the inheritance. I had to excuse myself from class, had to stand in the hallway with my hand pressed against the cool concrete wall, trying to breathe through the rage and hurt. They were calling my grandmother, this woman who still tended her garden every day, who still baked bread from scratch every week, who could recite entire passages of poetry from memory, mentally incompetent. They were calling me, the granddaughter who'd lived with her my entire life, who'd held her hand through Grandpa's cancer treatments and his death, a manipulator and a thief. I called Amelia Carter that afternoon. I'd found her through a recommendation from Mr. Higgins. She was an estate attorney in Atlanta, known for handling complex family disputes with both sharp legal acumen and genuine compassion. When I met her in her office 3 days later, Grandma beside me, I knew we'd found the right person. Amelia was in her 40s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence. She listened to our story without interrupting, taking notes occasionally, her expression growing more sympathetic and more determined with every detail. "They're claiming Eleanor was mentally compromised?" she asked, looking at my grandmother with concern. "I'm sitting right here," Grandma said tartly, "and I can assure you my mind is as sharp as it's ever been. Possibly sharper, since I'm no longer wasting mental energy trying to have a relationship with a daughter who never wanted one." Amelia smiled slightly. "I can see that. What we need to do is document your current mental state, which means getting you evaluated by a psychiatrist who specializes in cognitive function. I know it's invasive and unpleasant. Do whatever you need to do," Grandma said firmly. "I won't let them paint me as some confused old woman, and I won't let them take from Esther what she's always deserved." "Can I ask you something?" Amelia said, leaning forward. "Why did you sign over your half so quickly? Why not wait, take more time?" Grandma was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was steady but sad. "Because I know my daughter. I knew the moment she saw what Frank had left to Esther that she'd start calculating value. I knew she'd see dollar signs where there should be memories. And I wanted to make my intentions crystal clear while I still could, so that if anything happened to me, there would be no question about what I wanted." "You knew they'd contest it," I said, understanding dawning. "I hoped they wouldn't," Grandma said. "But I've known Carol for 57 years. I know how she thinks. Frank and I used to joke that we must have gotten switched at the hospital, because we never could understand how we'd raised someone so fundamentally different from us." The evaluation was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. I went to work, taught my classes, graded papers. But my heart wasn't in it. My heart was with Grandma, sitting in that house full of memories, surrounded by the physical evidence of a life built with love. I spent every evening there, helping her with the garden, sitting with her on the porch, sorting through photo albums and telling stories. She showed me pictures I'd never seen before. Her and Grandpa on their wedding day, young and full of hope. Grandpa in his Navy uniform. Grandma pregnant with Carol, her hand on her belly, smiling at the camera. "We had such dreams for her," Grandma said softly, touching Carol's baby picture. "We thought we were giving her everything, love, stability, a good home. But somewhere along the way, she decided that wasn't enough. She wanted more, always more. Bigger houses, better cars, fancier clothes. And when you came along, you didn't fit into that life she'd built. You were an inconvenience." "Did they ever ask for me back?" I asked, a question I'd wondered about my entire life but never quite had the courage to voice. "No," Grandma said, and the word was gentle but honest. "They'd call on your birthday, send cards at Christmas. Carol would ask how you were doing, but in that polite, distant way you ask about a neighbor's cat. There was no longing in it, no desire to be more involved. Frank and I used to wonder if we'd done something wrong, if we'd made it too easy for them to walk away. But then we'd look at you, this bright, beautiful child who deserved all the love in the world, and we decided we'd rather give you everything than worry about what they weren't giving." The cognitive evaluation came back exactly as expected. Grandma was sharp as a tack, her memory excellent, her reasoning clear and logical. There was no evidence of dementia, no signs of cognitive decline, no indication whatsoever that she'd been compromised by grief. But that didn't stop Richard Dale. Carol and Mark had hired him from a big firm in New York, the kind of lawyer who wore suits that cost more than my car and spoke in the clipped, aggressive tones of someone accustomed to winning. Our first mediation session was a nightmare. Richard spread papers across the conference table like he was dealing cards. My clients are concerned about their mother's well-being. The sudden death of her husband, the grief, the isolation, these are risk factors for diminished capacity. The evaluation you've provided shows her current state, but it doesn't address her state of mind when she made the decision to sign over her entire estate. She made that decision 3 weeks after her husband's death, Amelia countered. She was evaluated 6 weeks after his death. Are you suggesting she somehow recovered her faculties in that 3-week period? I'm suggesting, Richard said smoothly, that grief affects people in waves. That Mrs. Thompson may have been having a particularly difficult moment when she made this decision, influenced by her granddaughter, who has lived with her for 35 years and had ample opportunity to manipulate her. I felt Grandma stiffen beside me, and I reached for her hand under the table. Esther has been a devoted granddaughter, Amelia said, her voice calm but firm. She's lived with Eleanor and Frank since she was an infant, not because she was trying to secure an inheritance, but because her biological parents, your clients, gave her up and never looked back. My clients made a difficult choice to ensure their daughter would be raised in a stable home while they established their careers, Richard said. They've provided financial support over the years. They sent a check for my birthday every year, I interrupted, unable to keep quiet any longer. $200, like clockwork. Never a phone call on the actual day. Never a visit. Just a check, like I was a bill they had to pay. Richard looked at me with something like pity, which made my blood boil. Miss Thompson, I understand this is emotional for you. But we're talking about a substantial estate, and my clients have a right to their parents' assets. Their parents' assets? I said, my voice rising despite Amelia's warning hand on my arm. Frank wasn't their parent. Eleanor is Carol's mother, but Frank was just a man who happened to raise the child Carol abandoned. And those assets you're talking about? They're not investment properties or stock portfolios. They're the car Grandpa taught me to drive. They're the necklace Grandma wore to my college graduation because she wanted me to have something beautiful. They're the house where I learned what a home actually feels like. Esther, Amelia said gently, and I realized I was shaking. The mediation went nowhere. Richard was too skilled, too aggressive, and Carol and Mark sat behind him with expressions of wounded righteousness that made me want to scream. They'd recast themselves as concerned children, worried about their aging mother, trying to protect her from a manipulative granddaughter. Never mind that they hadn't visited more than twice a year for the past 3 decades. Never mind that when Grandpa was dying, they'd sent flowers instead of coming to say goodbye. Never mind that they'd never once asked me about my life, my job, my dreams, my struggles. The case went to trial. I'd never been in a real courtroom before, and it was nothing like the TV shows made it seem. It was smaller, more intimate, and somehow that made it worse. Every word felt more personal, every accusation more pointed. Judge Avery was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to opening statements with an expression that gave nothing away, and I couldn't tell if that was good or bad for us. Richard Dale painted a picture of a grief-stricken widow, isolated in her sorrow, influenced by a granddaughter who'd been living rent-free for 35 years and saw an opportunity to secure her future. He brought in financial records showing the value of the estate, the house, the cars, the jewelry, the savings accounts Frank had carefully managed. This is not an insignificant sum, Richard said, gesturing at the numbers on his presentation. We're talking about assets worth well over $2 million when you factor in the current value of the automobile collection. And Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, in a moment of profound grief, signed all of it over to Miss Esther Thompson without consulting her own daughter, without giving herself time to process her loss, without considering the implications. He made it sound like Grandma had acted on impulse, like she'd been so destroyed by grief that she hadn't known what she was doing. It was infuriating. Amelia's approach was different. She focused on the relationship, on the decades of love and care, on the fact that this wasn't a spontaneous decision but the culmination of a lifetime together. Eleanor Thompson didn't suddenly decide to leave everything to her granddaughter in a fog of grief, Amelia said. She made this decision because Esther has been her daughter in every way that matters. While Carol and Mark Thompson were building their real estate empire in Phoenix, Esther was building a life with her grandparents. She was there for homework help and holiday dinners. She was there through Frank's cancer diagnosis and treatment. She was there when he died, holding Eleanor's hand, helping her through the darkest moment of her life. When Grandma took the stand, I held my breath. Richard Dale approached her with that professional sympathy that felt more insulting than open hostility. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry for your loss. I know this must be incredibly difficult for you." "Thank you," Grandma said, her voice steady. "Can you tell me about the weeks following your husband's death? How you were feeling?" "Devastated," Grandma said simply. "Frank and I were married for 59 years. Losing him was like losing half of myself. And in that state of devastation, just 3 weeks after his death, you made the decision to sign over your entire estate to your granddaughter?" "Yes." "Wasn't that rather quick? Didn't you want time to process your grief before making such a major decision?" "I'd had my entire life to process what I wanted for my estate," Grandma said, and her voice was firmer now. "Frank and I had talked about it for years. We knew exactly what we wanted, and his death didn't change that. It only made me more determined to make sure our wishes were carried out." "But your daughter, Carol, surely you wanted to leave something for your own child?" "My child had everything she wanted," Grandma said. "Carol chose her career, her life in Phoenix, her expensive homes and cars. She made those choices freely, and Frank and I respected that. But she also chose not to be part of Esther's life, not to be part of our daily lives. You can't inherit a relationship you never invested in." Richard's expression flickered with annoyance. "Mrs. Thompson, with all due respect, you were grieving. You just lost your husband. How can you be certain you were thinking clearly?" "Because I've never thought more clearly in my life," Grandma said, and she looked directly at Carol for the first time since the trial began. "When Frank died, I realized how much of my life had been spent hoping Carol would come back, would want to be part of our family in a real way. His death freed me from that hope. It let me see things exactly as they were. I had one daughter by blood who treated us like obligation, and one granddaughter by heart who treated us like treasure. The choice was clear." I saw Carol flinch, saw something flash across her face, anger, hurt, maybe even shame, though it was gone too quickly to be sure. When it was my turn on the stand, I was terrified. Richard Dale looked at me like I was a particularly interesting bug he was about to dissect. "Miss Thompson, you've lived with your grandparents since you were an infant, is that correct?" "Yes." "Rent-free?" "I was a child," I said. "Then a teenager. Then a college student. Yes, rent-free." "And after college? You moved back in with them?" "I did. To help take care of Grandpa when he got sick." "How convenient," Richard said, and the implication hung in the air like poison. "It wasn't convenient," I said, my voice sharp. "It was necessary. Grandpa had cancer. Grandma was 78 years old. They needed help, and I was the only one who showed up to give it." "You could have hired a nurse." "I could have," I agreed. "But I wanted to be there. Because I loved them, and they loved me, and that's what family does." "Or," Richard said, leaning forward, "you saw an opportunity. An aging couple, a valuable estate, no other heirs present. You positioned yourself as the indispensable caregiver, the devoted granddaughter, knowing that when they died, you'd inherit everything." "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking now. "Isn't it? You're a high school teacher. You make what, $45,000 a year? And suddenly you stand to inherit over $2 million in assets. You can understand why my clients might be skeptical of your motives." "My motives," I said, and I could feel tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, were to love the people who loved me, who raised me when their own daughter wouldn't, who showed up for every moment of my life, who taught me what it means to be present, to be devoted, to choose love over and over again. I don't care about the money. I care about the life we built together, and I care about honoring their wishes." "But you'll take the money anyway." "I'll take what they wanted me to have," I said. "Because refusing it would dishonor their choice, and I won't do that." The trial dragged on for days. Carol and Mark took the stand, painting themselves as concerned, loving parents who'd made the difficult choice to let Eleanor and Frank raise me. They produced emails from years ago, correspondence where they'd sent checks and asked about my progress in school. But they couldn't produce memories. They couldn't produce moments of connection, stories of time spent together, evidence of a relationship that went beyond perfunctory obligation. Richard Dale brought in an expert witness, a psychologist who testified about the effects of grief on decision-making capacity. He talked about complicated grief, about how the loss of a spouse after a long marriage could temporarily impair judgment. Amelia countered with Eleanor's clean cognitive evaluation, with testimony from her doctor stating she was in excellent mental health, with character witnesses, neighbors, friends, her pastor, who all confirmed that Eleanor was sharp, capable, and very clear about what she wanted. But the moment that changed everything came near the end of the trial. "Your Honor," Amelia said, "I'd like to present additional evidence. We recently discovered that Eleanor Thompson had been keeping a video diary, recorded over the course of several years. With the court's permission, I'd like to play excerpts." Richard objected immediately, claiming the videos were hearsay, inadmissible, potentially doctored. But Judge Avery overruled him, clearly curious about what these videos might contain. The lights dimmed, and a screen was set up. I held my breath as Grandma's face appeared, years younger but unmistakably her, sitting in her favorite chair in the living room. "June 15th, 2019, her recorded voice said. "Frank suggested I start keeping these videos as a record, in case things ever got complicated. I thought he was being paranoid, but he said you can never be too careful with family matters." The video cut to another entry. March 3rd, 2020. "Carol called today, the first time in 8 months. She asked about the house, whether we'd thought about downsizing. She said it was too much space for 2 old people. She didn't ask about Esther, who's been living here and helping us maintain it. She didn't ask about Frank's health, even though he just finished his 2nd round of chemo. She asked about the house like it was already hers to sell." Another cut. December 25th, 2022. Christmas. "Esther made dinner, helped me bake pies, decorated the whole house. Carol sent a card and a check. Mark didn't even sign it himself, it was one of those printed signatures. I cried after Esther went to bed, not because I miss having Carol here, but because I'm grateful she chose to stay away. At least Esther never knew what it was like to be wanted and then unwanted. She's only ever known love." The videos continued, Grandma's voice steady and clear, documenting years of absence from Carol and Mark, years of presence from me. There were entries about teaching me to garden, about watching me graduate from college, about sitting with me during breakups and job applications and all the mundane, precious moments that make up a life. And then the final video, dated just 2 weeks after Grandpa's funeral. Grandma looked older in this one, her face drawn with grief, but her eyes were clear and her voice was firm. "If you're watching this, Carol, it means you're trying to contest your father's will or my decision to leave everything to Esther. So let me be perfectly clear for the record, while I am of sound mind and clear intention. Every item in this house has a story, and Esther is in all of them. The cars in the garage, she learned to drive in the Mustang, learned to rebuild an engine in the Corvette, learned patience and persistence and pride and workmanship from your father. The jewelry in my box, she wore my pearls to her college graduation because she wanted something beautiful and something of mine with her on that important day. The garden outside, we planted every single bush and flower together, spent countless hours with our hands in the soil, talking about everything and nothing. Your story in this house, Carol, is one of absence. And you can't inherit what you were never present for. You can't claim a relationship you never invested in. You can't sue for love you never gave. Frank and I built this life for Esther because she was here to build it with us. We left it to her because she earned it, not through manipulation or calculation, but through presence, through love, through showing up day after day, year after year. So if you're watching this, Carol, my answer is no. You don't get to swoop in now and take from her what you were never willing to give. She is my heir, my daughter in every way that matters, and I will not let you hurt her the way you hurt me. This is my final word on the matter. I love you, Carol, but I love Esther more. Because she loved me back." The screen went dark. The courtroom was silent. I was crying now, openly, couldn't stop. The tears even if I'd wanted to. Beside me, Amelia squeezed my hand. Across the aisle, Carol stared at the blank screen, her face pale. "Your Honor," Amelia said quietly, "additionally, we have emails between Carol and Mark Thompson and the elder Thompsons, spanning the past 10 years. In them, Carol and Mark repeatedly discourage Eleanor and Frank from coddling Esther, call Frank's car collection a rusty waste of money, and suggest multiple times that the couple should sell the house and move into a retirement community so the property could be put to better use. Richard Dale's expression had gone from confident to trapped. He knew we all knew that this was over. Judge Avery called a recess. When we returned 2 hours later, her face was set. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented," she said. "The cognitive evaluations, the testimony, the video diary, and the email correspondence. And I find the evidence of Eleanor Thompson's sound mind and clear intention to be overwhelming and unambiguous. Mrs. Thompson was not confused, not compromised, not manipulated. She made a deliberate choice to leave her estate to her granddaughter, a choice she'd been considering for years and finally executed after her husband's death. That is her right as the property owner, and I see no legal basis to overturn it. Furthermore, I find the plaintiff's characterization of Miss Esther Thompson as a manipulative opportunist to be unsupported by evidence and frankly insulting to a woman who has clearly spent her life in genuine, loving service to her grandparents. The case is dismissed. The will stands as written." The sound of her gavel was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Carol and Mark left immediately, Richard Dale hurrying them out before any reporters could catch them. But Carol paused at the courtroom door, looked back at us, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You can keep your trinkets." I stood up, and my voice, when I spoke, was quiet but clear. They weren't trinkets. They were my life. She left without responding, and I never saw her again. 3 months later, I'm standing in the garden at 427 Maple Street, wearing Grandma's apron with the faded strawberries. The peony bushes are beginning to show new growth, the first hints of spring emerging from the winter bare branches. Grandma is inside, making bread, the smell of it wafting out through the open kitchen window. I've taken a leave of absence from teaching to be here with her, to make sure she's not alone in this house that still echoes with Grandpa's absence. We're learning to navigate grief together, finding our rhythm as a family of 2 instead of 3. Sophie, the 7-year-old daughter of our neighbor Mrs. Chun, is crouched beside me, carefully repotting a small peony start that Grandma had prepared for her. "Like this?" Sophie asks, her small hands gentle with the roots. "Perfect," I say. "Just make sure the crown is right at the soil level, not too deep. Peonies don't like to be buried." "Will it bloom this year?" "Probably not," I say. "Peonies take their time. But in a few years, you'll have beautiful flowers, and you'll remember planting this with us." Sophie looks up at me with serious eyes. "My mom says your grandma gave you her house." "She did." "Because you took care of her?" "Because we took care of each other," I say. "That's what family does." Inside, I can hear Grandma humming, the same tune she's hummed my entire life, some old song from her childhood that I've never learned the name of but know by heart anyway. The Mustang is in the garage, where I sit sometimes just to feel close to Grandpa, my hands on the steering wheel he touched thousands of times. Grandma's pearl necklace is in my jewelry box upstairs, waiting for the next important moment when I need to carry her with me. Sophie finishes with her peony and stands up, brushing dirt from her knees. "Can I come back and see it grow?" "Any time you want," I say. "That's what gardens are for, coming back to, growing with." She runs off toward her house, clutching the pot carefully, and I stand there in the late afternoon sun, surrounded by the evidence of love. The house behind me, solid and warm. The garden at my feet, sleeping but not dead, waiting for spring. The smell of bread drifting out the window, the same smell that filled my childhood, my adolescence, every moment of my life that mattered. Carol and Mark wanted to take this from me. They saw it as assets on a spreadsheet, numbers to be divided and distributed. They couldn't understand that you can't divide love into fractions, can't put a price tag on the feeling of being wanted, chosen, cherished. The lawsuit taught me something I hadn't fully understood before, that the love I was given was mine. Not because it was willed to me in a legal document, not because it was signed over in an attorney's office, but because it was planted in me, root deep, long before anyone thought to put it on paper. They gave me away when I was 3 months old, handed me over like I was a problem with a solution. And maybe, in their minds, they solved it. They got to keep their careers, their freedom, their carefully curated life in Phoenix. They got to be the people they wanted to be, unencumbered by the messy reality of raising a child. But what they didn't count on was that Frank and Eleanor would fill that empty space with something so strong, so real, so permanent that no lawsuit, no amount of money, no clever lawyer could ever take it away. I think about the trial sometimes, about the way Richard Dale had tried to paint me as calculating, as someone who had positioned herself strategically for financial gain. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carol and Mark were the ones who saw everything through the lens of value and return on investment. They were the ones who measured relationships in terms of what they could extract from them. They looked at Grandpa's car collection and saw dollar signs. They looked at this house and saw market value. They looked at Grandma's jewelry and saw assets to liquidate. But when I looked at those things, I saw something entirely different. The Mustang wasn't worth whatever collectors might pay for a restored '69 in cherry condition. It was worth the summer Grandpa and I spent in the garage, him teaching me the difference between a carburetor and a fuel injector, me learning that patience and precision could transform rust into beauty. It was worth the look on his face when we finally got the engine to turn over, that mixture of pride and joy that told me I'd done something meaningful. Grandma's pearl necklace wasn't valuable because of the quality of the pearls or the craftsmanship of the setting. It was valuable because she'd worn it on her wedding day, because she'd clasped it around my neck the morning of my college graduation with tears in her eyes, because it carried the warmth of her skin and the weight of her love. When I wear it, I'm not wearing jewelry. I'm wearing a promise that I was cherished, that I mattered, that someone thought I was worth adorning with something beautiful. And this house, this modest craftsman with its wraparound porch and peeling paint and creaky floorboards, it wasn't worth $800,000. It was worth every scraped knee that Grandma bandaged at that kitchen sink, every birthday cake she baked in that oven, every story Grandpa told me in that living room while we watched the rain through those windows. It was worth the sound of their voices calling me down for breakfast, the feeling of coming home after a hard day to people who were genuinely glad to see me, the knowledge that within these walls, I was safe and wanted and loved without condition. That's what Carol and Mark could never understand. They thought they were fighting for their rightful inheritance, for what they deserved as the biological children of Frank and Eleanor. But inheritance isn't about biology or legal obligation. It's about legacy, about what you build together, about what you pour into someone and what they pour back into you. Frank and Eleanor's legacy wasn't their financial assets. It was the life they lived, the values they embodied, the love they gave so freely and completely. And I was the keeper of that legacy now. Not because a judge said so, though I was grateful for Judge Avery's wisdom and clarity. Not because the law was on my side, though Amelia had fought brilliantly for us. But because I had lived that legacy every single day of my 35 years. It was in my bones, in my blood, in the way I moved through the world. Grandma appears in the doorway, wiping flour from her hands on a dish towel. "Bread's almost ready," she calls out. "Are you coming in?" "In a minute," I say, and she nods, understanding like she always does that sometimes I need a moment to just stand here, to let the gratitude wash over me. I watch her disappear back into the kitchen, this woman who chose to be my mother when my biological mother chose to walk away. This woman who is 80 years old now, who moves a little slower than she used to, whose hands shake sometimes when she's tired, but whose spirit is as fierce and loving as it's ever been. I wonder sometimes what Carol feels, if she feels anything at all. Does she lie awake at night thinking about what she lost? Not the money or the property, but the relationship, the connection, the chance to know me as something more than an obligation? Does she regret the choice she made when I was 3 months old? Does she wish she could go back and choose differently? Or does she sleep soundly, content in the narrative she's constructed for herself, the story where she made a mature, responsible decision to prioritize her career, where Frank and Eleanor were the selfish ones for keeping me from her, where I was the manipulator who stole her inheritance? I'll never know. And in a way, I don't need to know. Her internal story is hers to live with. Mine is different, truer, built on a foundation of actual lived experience rather than revisionist justification. The sun is starting to set now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The peony bushes cast long shadows across the lawn, their bare branches reaching upward like prayers. In a few months, they'll burst into bloom again, those impossibly full flowers that Grandma loves so much. We'll cut some for the kitchen table, some for the mantel, some to take to Grandpa's grave. We'll photograph them like we do every year, documenting another cycle of growth and beauty. That's the thing about gardens. They teach you about continuity, about how life persists even in the face of loss. Grandpa is gone, but the peonies he helped plant are still here, still blooming, still beautiful. One day, Grandma will be gone too, and that thought makes my chest tight with preemptive grief. But the peonies will still bloom. The house will still stand. The Mustang will still run. And I'll still carry their love with me, planted so deep that nothing, not even death, can uproot it. I think about Sophie, running home with her small peony start, probably already planning where she'll plant it, how she'll care for it. In teaching her, I'm passing on what was taught to me. The knowledge, yes, but more than that. The attention, the care, the understanding that growing things requires patience and commitment and showing up day after day, even when you don't see immediate results. That's true for gardens, and it's true for relationships, and it's true for love. Carol and Mark never learned that lesson. Or maybe they learned it but chose to ignore it, decided that the immediate gratification of career success and financial achievement was more valuable than the slow, steady work of building a family. They optimized for efficiency, for return on investment, for climbing the ladder. And they got what they optimized for. They have their real estate empire, their beautiful house in Phoenix, their expensive cars and designer clothes and all the trappings of success. But they don't have this. They don't have the smell of bread baking on a Sunday afternoon. They don't have the satisfaction of hands dirty from honest work in a garden. They don't have the deep bone-level certainty that they are loved for who they are, not for what they can provide. They don't have a place where they are fully known and fully accepted. They don't have a home. And they tried to take mine. That's what still stings, even now, even after the victory in court. Not that they wanted the money or the property, I can almost understand that, but that they were willing to hurt me to get it. They were willing to drag Grandma through a trial, to question her mental capacity, to paint her as a confused old woman who didn't know her own mind. They were willing to call me a manipulator, to suggest that every moment of care I'd given was calculated, strategic, part of some long con. That reveals something fundamental about how they see the world. They couldn't imagine that I might have genuinely loved my grandparents, that my motives might have been pure, because in their world, nothing is done without an angle. In their world, love is transactional, relationships are strategic, and family is a network to be leveraged. The idea that someone might give freely, might care without expecting return, might show up simply because showing up is what you do for people you love, that was foreign to them. But that's the world I grew up in, the world Frank and Eleanor created. A world where love was the default, where care was freely given, where presence was its own reward. They modeled a different way of being human, and I absorbed it so completely that it became my operating system. That's their real legacy. Not the house or the cars or the jewelry, but the fundamental orientation toward life that they instilled in me. I pull off my gardening gloves and head toward the house, toward the light in the windows, toward the smell of fresh bread and the sound of Grandma humming. My hands are dirty, my knees are grass-stained, and there's soil under my fingernails. I smell like earth and growing things and home. Inside, Grandma will have set the table, probably cutting thick slices of warm bread, probably pouring 2 glasses of sweet tea because that's what we have with dinner on Sundays. This is my inheritance. Not the property value or the bank accounts, but this moment, this ordinary Sunday evening, this feeling of being exactly where I belong. This is what they couldn't take from me, no matter how hard they tried. This is what no court could ever grant or revoke, because it was mine before any will was written, mine before any lawyer got involved, mine from the moment Frank and Eleanor decided that the baby their daughter didn't want would be the child they chose to raise. They gave me away, Carol and Mark, when I was 3 months old. They looked at me and saw an inconvenience, an obstacle to the life they wanted to live. And in giving me away, they gave me the greatest gift I could have received, though they never intended it that way. They gave me to people who knew how to love, who understood that family is built not through biology but through daily acts of care and attention and devotion. And now they've tried to sue me for the physical manifestations of that love, for the objects that carry the memory of the life I lived with Frank and Eleanor. They wanted the cars and the jewelry and the house, but what they were really trying to take was proof that I was loved. They were trying to erase the evidence of my worth, to reduce my relationship with my grandparents to nothing more than opportunistic manipulation. But love isn't something you can sue for. It isn't something that can be contested in court or redistributed through legal proceedings. Love is what gets planted in the spaces between people when they choose each other, day after day, year after year. It's what grows when you tend it carefully, when you show up even when it's hard, when you stay even when leaving would be easier. Frank and Eleanor planted that love in me before I was old enough to understand what they were giving me. They watered it with patience and pruned it with gentle discipline and fed it with their constant, unwavering presence. And it grew, root deep and strong, so thoroughly integrated into who I am that no amount of legal maneuvering could ever dislodge it. That's what I wanted to tell Carol when she sneered about my trinkets, but I didn't have the words then. I was too overwhelmed, too emotional, too close to it all. But I have the words now. These aren't trinkets. They're evidence. They're proof. They're the physical manifestation of a love so powerful, so transformative, that it shaped every aspect of who I became. And I will tend them the way Grandma taught me to tend her garden, with care and attention and respect for what they represent. The Mustang will be driven, not locked away in a garage as an investment. Grandma's pearls will be worn, not stored in a safe deposit box. This house will be lived in, filled with warmth and life and the ongoing story of love that Frank and Eleanor began and that I'm continuing. One day when I'm old and it's my turn to decide what becomes of these things, I'll give them to someone who understands what they really are. Not their market value, but their meaning value. Someone who gets that a house is more than 4 walls and a roof, that a car is more than metal and horsepower, that jewelry is more than precious stones and precious metals. Maybe I'll have children of my own by then, though at 35, that window is narrowing. Or maybe I'll find my Sophie, some child who needs what I needed, who deserves what Frank and Eleanor gave me. And I'll pass it on, this legacy of chosen love, this understanding that family is something you build through presence and care and devotion. As I step through the door into the kitchen, into the warmth and the smell of fresh bread and the sound of Grandma humming, I feel it settle around me like a blessing, like an inheritance that was earned not in dollars but in moments, not in transactions but in transformations, not in blood but in choice. This is what they couldn't take. This is what Judge Avery understood when she dismissed the case. This is what the video diary proved and what the trial confirmed. I didn't manipulate my way into this inheritance. I lived my way into it, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one act of love at a time. They gave me away, but they couldn't sue for the love that was planted in the empty space they left behind. That was always mine to keep. And as I sit down at the table with Grandma, as she passes me the bread still warm from the oven, as we bow our heads and she says grace the way she said it 10,000 times before, I know with absolute certainty that I am the richest person I know. Not because of what I inherited in legal terms, but because of what I inherited in love. And that's something that no one, not Carol, not Mark, not Richard Dale, not any judge or lawyer or court in the world could ever take away from me. It's mine, planted deep, growing strong, blooming year after year like the peonies outside, beautiful and impossible and absolutely, undeniably real. Please like, comment, and share. If this is your first time watching my video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified whenever I post a new story.